So we're really excited to talk today about Joe Exotic and his case, everything that's been going on. So I've got a couple of questions for you, if you don't mind.
Okay, sounds great.
Awesome. So first, I'd like for you to introduce yourself, if you don't mind.
Okay, my name is Roger Roots, and I am attorney with John Pierce Law, and I am the attorney for Joe Maldonado, also known as Joe Exotic, in the U.S. 10th Circuit Court of Appeals.
Fantastic. Can you provide a brief overview of Joe's original convictions and the key charges that were against him?
Okay, well, Joe originally faced a large number of charges. So he was, I guess, the most serious charges were 2 counts of murder for hire, where he was alleged to have plotted and even paid or hired so-called hitmen to murder one of his rivals in the exotic animal world, and that is Carol Baskin, who runs an exotic animal park over in the Tampa, Florida area. But Joe also faced a lot of wildlife violation charges, paperwork violations, also 5 counts of violating the Endangered Species Act by killing 5 tigers. And it's arguable that zoo animals were never intended to be in the Endangered Species Act. So it's questionable whether those counts even were legal counts. But also, things like selling animals over state lines without the proper paperwork and things like that.
How has your legal team responded to the allegations of him hiring a hitman to kill Carol Baskin?
Well, of course, he was convicted of those charges based on testimony mostly. And it has now come to light in Joe's recent motion for new trial based on newly discovered evidence. It has come to light that many of the government's witnesses have essentially recanted their testimony. They have admitted that they essentially lied at his trial. Including Glover, who was the so-called hired hitman in the case, quote unquote. He now admits, and he has come forward recanting his entire testimony, saying that he was never hired by Joe to kill this rival named Carol Baskin.
And that's huge in this case.
Oh, absolutely. This was the most important. Well, he's doing 21 years in prison right now for those convictions. I would even argue that the wildlife violation charges were just thrown in almost by happenstance, or really, we argue that they were thrown in by the federal prosecutors to tug on the heartstrings of the jurors, because the other part of the case was so weak. The murder for hire charges were so weak that the government decided to throw in these animal abuse type allegations to sort of trick the jury into disregarding how weak the government's case was.
Right. And that's terrible. In the appeal, there's been a lot of evidence that's come to light, a lot of new findings. Can you elaborate a bit on the 700 plus new evidence videos that were not used in the original trial?
Well, let's put it this way. An attorney named John Phillips spent about a year gathering undiscovered evidence that was really not before the jury. And one thing that he did was gather the cell phones of many of the government's witnesses. And when those cell phones were analyzed, it was found that they included a lot of texts and a lot of recordings, which were not given to the defense and were in some cases not even given to the prosecutors. So this is newly discovered evidence that really almost totally, you could say, disrupts or disputes the original allegations.
Wow. That's going to be wild to see unfold for sure. I want to talk about Exhibit 158, which involves James Garretson and identity theft. Can you elaborate a little bit on that for me? What's the significance of that in this case?
Well, okay, James Garretson was he was a government witness, and he had a relationship. He had operated some strip clubs and things where he had used fake IDs in the past for a lot of his employees and whatnot. And so he's the guy that arranged for this Alan Glover to obtain fake ID. And the idea there was supposedly a story that Joe Exotic had hired this Alan Glover to obtain fake ID and then travel to Florida so that he wouldn't be caught under his real name. So that was the idea. Of course, we argue that, in fact, it was Gerritsen himself who set up the whole fake ID idea. It was not Joe Exotic's idea.
Gosh. And what new testimonies have emerged that could potentially exonerate Joe from everything?
Well, basically, the most important factor is that the whole idea of this murder for hire plot came from these undercover federal informants. The whole idea, let's put it this way. No one disputes that Joe has hostility, or let's put it this way. Everyone who is in the exotic animal world regards Carol Baskin as public enemy number one. And that is because Carol Baskin has publicly been the leader of movements to ban the petting zoos and ownership of exotic animal pets. And so the whole exotic animal world essentially regards her as, a huge, the public enemy number one, like I said. So there's no question that Joe regarded her very, very with great animosity, but he certainly did not plot her murder. It was really these undercover government informants with the government that came up with this whole notion, this whole idea.
I love a good conspiracy, and not to say that this is a conspiracy, but everything that has happened with this case has just been so gripping, and so many details that have come to light, and everybody has just been so obsessed over everything. Which, do you think that has helped or hurt the case being so in the public eye?
Well, let's put it this way. One of the points that we make is that many of the witnesses were paid for this, this reality TV show that was in the works almost on the side. So there was this federal prosecution that was developing, and at the same time, on the side, there was this Tiger King documentary TV show, and many of the witnesses were paid by the TV show, this TV series, and I argue, to some extent, at least, they recognized that they were there to produce drama and make it a dramatic thing. And that did play a role in this whole narrative that the government built.
Yeah, I think something people tend to forget is that television is for entertainment, and you can't always take it as a trusted source of information. So definitely a lot of misleading information came out of all of the media that was pushed about Joe. So I'm excited to kind of get to the bottom of things with you on these things today. What are the primary legal arguments being presented in the 2024 appeal?
Well, number one, we argue that the judge who denied the initial motion for new trial, he used the wrong legal test. The test for granting a new trial based on newly discovered evidence should be if the newly discovered evidence would likely have changed the outcome. All right, but this judge at the lower level, basically, he held a higher standard. He basically held the standard. He suggested that Joe Exotic had to show evidence that would have completely acquitted him at trial. Well, acquittal and a different outcome are slight variations. Let's put it this way. I think by the way, I believe there was enough evidence to show under either test that he was entitled to a new trial. But even under under the extreme test, this idea that it had to be the kind of evidence that would produce acquittal, I believe that would have actually, that should have been, the evidence that he produced is enough to produce an acquittal. But that standard is not the standard. The standard is just newly discovered evidence that might create a different outcome in front of the jury. So you think of a jury of 12 people, there might be, in a case where one or two or three or four jurors might give pause before they convicted someone. It just, the newly discovered evidence, most of which we mean these witnesses who have recanted their stories and that kind of evidence, combined with the text, the newly discovered text messages that more or less corroborate the newly discovered evidence, that certainly was sufficient to produce a different outcome at a trial.
Yeah, it definitely does sound that way. What role do the alleged Brady violations play into the current appeal?
Well, there's several aspects of that. There was a U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service special agent who we now know deliberately presented the evidence of some of the charges. I'll just say specifically, for an example, the counts involving the 5 tigers that were killed. So remember, Joe Maldonado, that's his real name, yeah. Joe Exotic, was probably the most successful tiger zoo breeder in the United States. He certainly owned the largest number of tigers, more than anyone in the United States. And of course, he'd been doing tiger exhibitions, even magic shows and things for 20 years, decades. And in that time, obviously, tigers have to be put down. They have to be put down when they are old or lame or infirm, diseased, or whatnot.
Just like horses would.
Yeah, of course. If you have a pet, if you have a dog or a cat, there comes a time where a pet owner has to put the animal down. We now know that the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service deliberately cut the heads off of the tigers that were buried in the ground and presented the heads before the jury at the trial and deliberately left the bodies in the ground. Okay, we now know that that was quite deliberate, and it was deliberate because the government wanted to avoid questions about the weakness, the age, the illnesses, the lameness of these tigers that were put down.
Just an attempt to make it appear more vicious and malicious.
Yes, exactly.
And how has the legal strategy that you guys have put together evolved from the original trial to the court appeal? What different approach are you guys taking to hope for this different outcome?
Well, now remember, he has lost his direct appeal, so he's now at a stage where he doesn't have many proceedings left. He did appeal his original conviction. The 10th Circuit originally agreed that he had been over-sentenced, and so he was, he originally was sentenced to 22 years. They ordered the lower court to resentence him. The lower court resentenced him to 1 year less, so 21 years. So he's that stage of his appeals is over. So now this is what you call, it's more of a, I won't call it a last ditch effort, but now it's based on this newly discovered evidence that has surfaced. And a lot of this, we have to give a great thanks to an attorney named John Phillips, who spent months, gathering this newly discovered evidence. So now basically what we are trying to do, the lower judge has denied that motion, and that is on appeal. So we are trying to get the 10th Circuit to overrule the lower court and order a new trial.
Start from scratch?
Yes.
Nice.
Yeah. Well, let's put it this way, start from scratch with regard to some of the counts.
Yes. Gotcha. What are the biggest challenges you foresee in this appeal process?
The biggest challenges. Keep in mind that on appeal, your biggest challenge is to overcome the inertia and the momentum. Mm-hmm. So, upper courts that review lower courts tend to give great discretion and they tend to grant a lot of discretion to the lower courts, and they tend to say, well, the lower courts saw the evidence more than we did up here on appeal. So that's the biggest challenge of all on appeal, is you have to overcome this notion that, the lower court must have seen the evidence more than we did. Mm-hmm. And so, so that we certainly need to overcome that obstacle.
Do you think with it being so publicized that's going to make things a little bit easier in this instance?
Well, I do believe there's a lot of attention on this case. I do believe the public is very interested. Joe himself, ironically, has become a national celebrity. And at the time, he did not, no one knew that the Tiger King show would be as successful as it ended up being. And of course, Joe has been in jail the entire time. He's been locked up the entire time. And he had never actually seen the Tiger King series until we basically showed him in jail. We met with him in jail and showed him the videos of the Tiger King show. It was the first time he had ever seen the show.
And what was that like, being able to be there with him while he experienced this for the first time?
Well,
What
it's
was
very
the reaction to how he was portrayed?
yeah. He had I would call him he had a wide variety of opinions.
Yeah.
Um, he obviously everyone believes that they are falsely depicted when they see themselves on a documentary. He was a little bit plus and a little bit minus. The series did sort of capture his character. He has a colorful personality, but it certainly also sort of made him look crazy and a little bit, you know, almost suspicious in that way. And so he is, I won't go deep into it, but he is contemplating potentially some kind of civil action, perhaps.
I can say, in being somebody who watched all of the everything that was put out about Joe Exotic in this entire case, and the zoo and Carol Baskin, just like everybody else, I got really invested in it as well. Especially, COVID happened. We had nothing else to do. So the entire world was all eyes on Joe Exotic in that situation. And in knowing all the information that I had from the documentaries and all of the media, I did have a preconceived notion about what this man would be like. And I was able to interview him a couple of months ago from jail. And it wasn't at all what I thought it was going to be. Going into that interview, I'll be honest with you, I was expecting what is depicted. I was expecting just pure unhinged insanity. And I was strapping in for a wild ride, But then in speaking to him in the interview, that really honestly 100% changed my perception of that person. He's not as, I'm sure he's very colorful personality, but not as wild and unhinged as I expected at all. So that was like a very nice surprise, getting to speak to him as a regular human and, just flip-flopping that perception that has been cast on me. Do you feel like you had the same type of experience in meeting him and being able to get to know him a little more?
Oh, yeah. Joe is very thoughtful and I would even say intellectual.
Yeah,
He,
I said the same thing, not to cut you off, but
yeah. A lot of people don't realize that Joe actually has discovered, some scientific developments about tiger genetics.
oh, wow.
I believe he was the first person ever to create maybe not a liger, where you can cross a tiger with a lion and create what's known as a liger. Mm-hmm. But then he also went further, and I believe he created something called a lilager, which means a liger with a tiger or a liger with a lion. And so Joe really is the world's foremost authority, ironically, on tiger genetics. He really should be lecturing at universities.
Right. And a lot of people know that side of him. All they see is just, what has been put out. So that's incredible to hear.
Yeah. In my opinion, he is the world's foremost authority on tigers, tiger behavior. He could probably teach, tiger biologists, specialists a lot about that species.
Yeah, I'm sure. Hey, he's been behind bars for far too long now, but let's talk a little bit about that. How has his time in prison affected his mental and physical health that you can tell?
Well, I can tell you, I've met with him several times in the federal prison in Fort Worth. He's had some health issues. He seems to be very optimistic, though. I think he's very hopeful about the outcome of this appeal. He's obviously he wants to get back out into the world and get back to work, doing things and maybe entertaining. He's a great entertainer. Mm-hmm. So, he's had some health setbacks, but I believe he really is looking forward to a future where he can get this conviction overturned and get this all behind him.
That's good. I'm glad to hear that he's keeping a positive attitude through everything. That's really important. What impact has the Big Cat Safety Act had on the case and on his appeal?
Well, okay, let me just talk about this big Cat Safety Act. So now it is illegal. This has happened while he's been locked up. Congress has essentially granted Carol Baskin's new law. It is now illegal to own tigers or lions as pets, and especially for petting or any kind of public exhibition. And, arguably, this can interfere with things like circuses and things like, all the attractions that we used to think of Siegfried and Roy, magic shows and things. So that act is probably going to make all those things prohibited in the future. I believe it is. So let's put it this way. If Joe gets out of prison, and I have briefly discussed this, he's not likely to return to that world again. He just can't. He probably will never be able to, work in that field. But I think, again, he should be lecturing at universities because of his great knowledge of the topic. And, he has so much to give to the world in terms of what he knows about these things.
Yeah. Have you had a chance to talk to him about what he wants to convey to his supporters through this appeal process?
Well, he's very grateful for all the people who've supported him. And in fact, there have been some celebrities who have come forward and really supported him and even contacted politicians. He's had people even contact, seeking for a pardon from the president and those kinds of things. He's very grateful for that. And, obviously the world of exotic animals has personalities. Carol Baskin's another one. All right. And she has her own supporters. And, they have two rival ways of looking at the exotic animal industry, two different opinions. You could say it's political. Yeah. Joe is obviously sort of the libertarian end of that perspective. He believes in freedom of exhibiting these animals. Carol Baskin does not, So in some ways, it's it's part of the political discourse of our age, I would say.
Mm-hmm. And if the appeal is successful, what are the next steps for Joe? What does he plan to do?
Well, he very much wants to get back into entertaining. And he has talked about, lecturing on this topic, and maybe even about the injustice of the criminal justice system as well. Mm-hmm. I don't know if you know, but he is a musician. He's actually had some
he's
albums and songs and things that have really, he has a vast listenership in terms of his music. Mm-hmm. So he would like to get back into entertainment and those kinds of things.
Well, here at the Tippy Jo Show, we do what's called stairwell sessions. So if this appeal works out the way that we all hope that it does, we'd love to get Joe in the studio so he can play a little something for us in the stairwell. That would be too cool.
That would be fantastic.
That would be fantastic. How does Joe plan to rebuild his life and career post-incarceration if the appeal is successful?
Well, I should say that he is flat broke. A lot of people think that he, because he is a national celebrity, a lot of people are under the impression that he has, resources. He has none. I can tell you he is flat broke, bankrupt. So he will basically be starting over from scratch. And I think that he has enough support, though, that he could probably find some platform. And he's an entrepreneur, and he really is a hustler. And I think he'll do great in terms of, promoting his projects. Mm-hmm. But the first thing before any of that is to get him out of prison.
Yes, of course. And I think him being so diversified in all of the different avenues that he does is definitely going to help him with rebuilding an empire, essentially, once he gets out. So we're really looking forward to that. How can the public support Joe's appeal and legal efforts?
Well, there's the NCLU, so you can go to nclu.com. That's the National Constitutional Law Union.com, nclu.com, for contributing to his legal defense support. I think there's also joeexotictv.com. And although he's locked up, he does manage to get a word out via, different platforms through some of his supporters on the outside.
Of course. And I've got one final question for you. What are Joe's thoughts on his presidential bid and how does it intersect with the legal battles?
Um, well, he briefly announced that he would run for president this year, 2024. He sort of withdrew that. I believe he has endorsed Trump at the moment. Um, who knows what the political world holds for him in the future? He's been both a libertarian. He has run it under the Libertarian Party banner, and I believe he's actually he's very liberty minded. I don't think he's really cemented into a particular political party, but he's all about freedom. So I do think he actually would seek a political future of some kind.
That's going to be very interesting to see the outcome of that. Well, Roger, it has been a joy talking to you today. We really appreciate you sitting down and talking about Joe and all of the things to come with his court case. My name is Tippy. This has been the Tippy Jo Show. And once again, thank you so much.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Yeah. Do you have any final words you'd like to say before we hop off here?
I would just say I hope everyone really pays attention and keeps track with this appeal. I do believe that he's been wrongly convicted of all the charges, and I would just say free Joe Exotic.
Yeah. Hashtag free Joe Exotic. Love it. All right, Roger. Thank you so much.
Thank you.